And we are back with the third segment of the GSMC Basketball Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. And in this third segment, we are going to be talking about the worst teams in the NBA based off of young core. So based off of their young core, who are the worst teams in the NBA? That is what this list is going to be doing. So let me just go ahead and pull up my notes. And if you guys are interested in some of the best teams based off of their young core, I do these. I've been doing this segment for a while now, so you can actually look at the YouTube channel and go ahead and see what I think are the other teams that are like, and where I rank them based off of their young core. I started with 1 through 5, and then I continue 10, 5 through 10, 10 through 15, this, that, and the other, etc., and so on and so forth, and I continued going on until I've made it to these teams. So if there are any of you guys who are interested in figuring out or listening to who I think are the best teams based off of their young core, all the way down to the worst teams, there's your answer. And for those of you guys on the audio side, you should be able to hear that segment in a few of the previous podcasts that I went ahead and uploaded before this one. So for those of you guys who might be confused on where to look for these, that should answer your question. So the worst teams with the young core. We're going to start at the 5th worst team based off of their young core, and that is the Los Angeles Lakers. Now, the Lakers, they have a lot of young talent. They do have a lot of young talent, but doesn't mean it's good talent. In fact, actually, no. Let me rephrase that. They have a lot of young players, but that doesn't mean that all of those players are incredibly talented. The only player there that part of the young core that I would actually consider talented is Dalton Knecht, and he's 23 years old. And aside from him, I'm not entirely sure I don't like any of those young cores. I don't like any of those young guys on the team, and literally the only one that I like is Dalton Knecht. And even then, I don't even know if Dalton is going to be good going into the Lakers for this season, because there is a tendency there's a lot of pressure when playing with LeBron. There's a lot of pressure when playing in Los Angeles. I don't know if Dalton Knecht is going to be able to handle all that pressure, especially considering how, he's never played an NBA game before. So there's a lot of pressure on him. And then not to mention Bronny. And I understand, Summer League, it doesn't really mean much, and the stats in the Summer League, they're meaningless, essentially, when it comes, and when you think about it in terms of, like, NBA season, and how there's so many players that were terrible in the Summer League, but ended up being good in the NBA, and there were so many players that were good in the Summer League, but ended up being terrible in the NBA, and, the Summer League doesn't determine anything. It's a completely different league. I totally understand that. However, based off of Summer League performances, because that is the only thing that I'm able to base this judgment off of, Bronny James was not that impressive. Like, his performances were very lackluster. I'm sorry to say it, but it's like they weren't that impressive. And I'm rooting for Bronny. I hope that Bronny has a very good career with the Lakers and his father, and I really hope that he finds his stride. But as of right now, not very impressive game coming in, or not very impressive Summer League performances coming in from Bronny. And aside from Bronny and Dalton Knecht, who are the two most popular young players on the team, there's also, Jalen Hoodshif, Max Christie, Maxwell Lewis, Cam Reddish, Jackson Hayes, and Jared Vanderbilt. And every single one of those players that I just mentioned are just, I'm sorry, I'm not a big fan of them. They're just really, really, they're not it. They're not the kind of players that you want to build your team around, and they're not the kind of players that you want to develop into great players. Like, you don't really expect them to develop into such fantastic players, which is why I think the Lakers are ranked 5th on this list. So, next team, the 4th worst team based off of their depth, is the Boston Celtics, and I'm only using Kristaps here because, the rest of the Celtics is just, they're older players. They're veteran players, or young veteran players. I can't even say, I want to call Jason Tatum a veteran player, but he's still relatively young. And even though he's been in the playoffs and he's been to the Western Conference Finals and he's been to the Eastern Conference Finals and he's been to the finals numerous times in his career. Like, I can't really say that he's old, but I also can't really say that he's that young either. So it's like, it's either or, in my opinion. But anyways, the Celtics, obviously, since they're in the second apron and they're paying every single one of their starting lineups a lot of cash, the young lineup that they have isn't really going to be all that impressive because all of the money is going into the starting lineup, which is okay because, as the Celtics, they literally just won the NBA championship without needing to have a serious young core. Like, they have the lineup that they need. There's really nothing that the Celtics need to do to change anything to continue being a contending team. And all they have to do is just make sure that their players stay under contract because their players, while I did say that they weren't young, that doesn't mean that they're old. You could still sign them for several more years and you could still keep your championship hopes alive. Now, the Celtics and the young core that they have, there's Jaden Springer, who's all right, Jordan Walsh, Baylor Shearman, forgive me if I messed up the name. They just acquired Lonnie Walker IV, who is a great player. He was great for the Nets. Xavier Tillman and Neemias Queta. Forgive me if I botched that last name. But Lonnie Walker, a lot of people really consider Lonnie Walker like a much shorter version of Jaylen Brown, and a little bit of a weaker scorer than Jaylen Brown, but he's going to be coming off the bench, so you don't need him to be that much of a competent scorer. But this is the young core that the Celtics have. Again, you don't really need to worry about young players if you are the Celtics because your team is already in championship contending. Like, it's already in championship contention, so it's really no big deal. Having a bad young core and being on this list. It's not that big of a deal. Now, the next team on this list is the New York Knicks, and they only have 4 players who I would even consider young, and young being below the age of 25. Precious Achiuwa, forgive me if I messed up that last name, Tyler Kolek, Miles McBride, and Pacome Didiet. Forgive me if I messed up any of their last names. But again, similar to the Boston Celtics, this lineup isn't necessarily dependent on their young core. They already have a very solid team and they have so much chemistry. If there's any team that I think has the best chemistry in the NBA, it is the New York Knicks, because everybody in that lineup, you can argue everybody in that starting lineup has played with each other since college. They've been with each other since they were teenagers. So that their chemistry is going to be absolutely, it's going to be Hall of Fame. It's going to be elite. And that's sort of what the Knicks and their reputation is built off of, and that's their identity. They don't need to be a young team. They are a team that's been playing together for a very long time, and they have that chemistry. That's their identity, and that's how they're going to win. So they don't really need to focus on having a young core, in my opinion, similar to the Boston Celtics. And the lineup that they have, even though none of the players, even though Jalen Brunson's not young, not 25, Josh Hart, Mikal Bridges, Randall, even though all of those guys are not, 20, they might not be 25 years old, but they're still rather young. They're still a pretty young team, in terms of, Jalen Brunson is 28 years old. Julius Randle, I'm just going to check his age as well. I believe he's 29 years old. And let's see, Mikal Bridges is, let's just look at the age right here. He's 28 years old. See, so this is a relatively young team. Again, it's not a young core kind of team for this list, but it's still a relatively young team. So they don't really need to establish a young core, similar to the Boston Celtics. Now, that opinion sort of changes, however, when I move on to the next 2 teams, which is the Clippers, and you'll see who the last team is. Now, the Clippers being on this list and having one of the worst young cores in the NBA is not ideal. And they could have had the best, because they did have Shai Gilgeous-Alexander before trading Paul George, but that ended up not that ended up just falling out. But aside from that, the Clippers having one of the worst young cores in the NBA right now is definitely not ideal with the situation that they're in. So the reason why I say this is because right now the Clippers, they literally just lost Paul George, meaning they just lost their best chances of making it all the way to the NBA Finals and winning a title. And now that they have one of the worst young cores in the NBA, they're really going to struggle in the future if Kawhi decides to leave, if James Harden decides to leave, or if either of those players end up falling off, because James Harden is starting to decline and Kawhi Leonard is starting to get more injury prone. And if he's not playing for the Clippers, and if James Harden's not playing for the Clippers, we could see the Clippers completely bottoming out. And the players that they have on their team, the young players, they have Kevin Porter Jr., who's 24, Cam Christie, who's 19, Kobe Brown, also 24, Kai Jones, 23, and Bodes Highland, who's 24. And again, this is not a young core where you could expect to win something out of it. And the fact that they haven't won anything with the lineups that they have is not ideal. So this is a team that really needs to establish a young core and needs to rebuild for the future, because I don't see them doing much with the young players that they have now or with the older players that they have now. So it's a completely different story than from the Knicks and from the Celtics. Now, while the Clippers, yes, there's a possibility that they make the playoffs for next season, I highly doubt that that's going to happen. And if Kawhi or James Harden, if either one of them, God forbid, either one of them gets hurt, or God forbid, either one of them just doesn't perform the same way, it could be over for them. And the last team, the worst team with the worst young core in the entire NBA, is the Phoenix Suns. Now, the Phoenix Suns, they only have 3 young players. Ryan Dunn, Igodaro, forgive me if I botched that last name. Again, very difficult to pronounce. And finally, Bol. Those guys are the only young players on the Phoenix Suns. Now, I don't gotta tell you exactly where the problems are with Phoenix. I think everybody knows exactly what Phoenix's problems are, but I might as well go ahead and say it anyway. They gave up a lot of draft capital in order to be able to sign Kevin Durant and get Kevin Durant and in the trade. And also they needed to be able to get Bradley Beal as well. And because of those 2 moves, now they're sort of stuck in Kevin Durant, Bradley Beal poverty. So they have to run it back with Kevin Durant and Devin Booker and Bradley Beal. They have to do it again, and they have to try to see if they can put themselves in a good contention to win, because they don't have any draft capital. And that's the big problem with Phoenix. Like, the difference between Phoenix and the Clippers is that Phoenix, you could argue that Phoenix is going to be good for a while, considering that they do still have Devin Booker on the roster, and they're still probably going to be a competent team, but it's still going to be a very short team, and it's not going to be a deep team that has a deep bench, which is not a championship team, in my opinion. So that's all that I have on this list. Again, these are the worst teams based off of their young core. So I desperately need to blow my nose right now. And while I'm doing that, I will, you'll see the ad going on. And we're going to go into a break. And then we're going to go into the 4th segment where I talk about some NBA rumors. Right now, there's a big one surrounding Jimmy Butler. So I'll be right back after this short break. Be sure to stay tuned.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.